Cop. What are you doing here, boy? You don't belong in this neighborhood. Boy. I'm just walking home. Please, I didn't do anything. Cop. Don't talk back to me. Sprays pepper spray. Boy. Ah! My eyes. Help! The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street. It was the kind of neighborhood where families waved to each other from manicured lawns, kids rode their bikes in cul-de-sacs, and joggers passed by with earbuds in. To an outsider, it looked picture-perfect, safe, welcoming, ordinary. But for one 13-year-old black boy named Marcus, it was about to become the setting of a nightmare he would never forget. Marcus had just left his best friend's house a couple of blocks away. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, bouncing slightly as he walked. He hummed to himself, still laughing about the video game battle he and his friend had just finished. It was a normal day, one of those moments when childhood feels carefree, untouched by the weight of the world. But for Marcus, even those simple walks home were never entirely free of unease. His father had always reminded him to be careful. Don't run in certain places. Keep your hands visible. Be polite if stopped by an officer. At his age, most kids were told to look both ways before crossing the street. Marcus was told how to survive being black in America. As he reached the corner, he noticed a police cruiser parked near the curb. The engine was running, a low hum vibrating against the quiet of the street. Inside, a white officer sat, his eyes fixed on Marcus as though he were prey wandering into the wrong territory. Marcus slowed his pace, his father's warnings echoing in his mind. The cop opened the door with a sharp motion, stepping out in full uniform. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. His presence was heavy, commanding, but not in the way that made people feel safe. Instead, it was the kind of presence that made the air tighten with tension. "Hey!" the officer barked. "What are you doing here, boy?" Marcus froze, his heart hammering. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking home. He clutched the strap of his backpack. "I'm just heading home, sir," he said, his voice small but steady. The cop walked closer, each step deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "Home? Around here? Don't lie to me. You don't live in this neighborhood." Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, I do. Just a few houses down." He pointed in the direction of his street, hoping that would be enough. But it wasn't. The officer narrowed his eyes. "Don't get smart with me. I asked you a question. What are you really doing here?" The boy felt the sting of humiliation rising in his chest. He had seen this scene play out on the news, on social media. Black boys stopped for existing, treated like criminals before they could even grow into men. Now it was happening to him, and the weight of it pressed down on his young shoulders. "I'm telling the truth," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "Hands out of your pockets," the cop snapped suddenly, though Marcus's hands were already visible. "Now!" Startled, Marcus lifted his hands higher, palms open. His body trembled. A couple of neighbors glanced out from their porches, curiosity flickering in their eyes, but no one intervened. To them, maybe it looked like just another routine police stop, but to Marcus, it felt like the end of his innocence. The officer took a step closer, towering over him. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place? Don't play games with me, boy." "I'm not—" Marcus tried, but before he could finish, the officer's hand shot to his belt. In an instant, a sharp spray of liquid blasted across Marcus's face. His eyes burned like fire, his throat seized, and he let out a scream that tore through the quiet street. "Ah, my eyes, help!" he cried, clawing at his face, stumbling backward as the burning sensation overwhelmed him. The world blurred into a haze of pain and tears. His knees buckled and he fell to the ground, coughing, choking, gasping for air. The pepper spray was relentless, clinging to his skin like acid. The officer stood over him, breathing heavy, as though he had just subdued a violent criminal instead of a terrified child. That'll teach you to smart off to an officer, he muttered under his breath, not caring who heard. A few neighbors finally stepped closer, pulling out their phones, recording what was unfolding. Their voices were shaky, some horrified, some hesitant, but no one dared get too close. "Isn't that just a kid?" one whispered. "He didn't even do anything," another said, holding her phone high to capture the scene. But Marcus couldn't hear them clearly. His world was fire and fear, his small body writhing in pain on the asphalt. Every breath felt like knives slicing his lungs. He cried out again, "Please, someone, help!" For the boy, seconds felt like hours. His mind raced with confusion and terror. What had he done wrong? Why was this happening? He remembered his father's words. "Stay calm. Don't resist. Keep your hands up." But none of it had mattered. The officer reached for his radio, muttering something about suspicious activity. But his voice wavered just slightly. Maybe he sensed the eyes of the neighbors on him. Maybe he noticed the cameras recording. But still, his pride and prejudice held him in place. And in that moment, Marcus felt utterly alone, his young heart breaking under the crushing weight of injustice. What he didn't know, what the officer couldn't possibly imagine, was that his father was only minutes away. And with him would come a reckoning neither the cop nor the neighborhood was prepared for. Marcus lay curled on the pavement, tears mixing with the burning pepper spray, his small frame shuddering as he tried to breathe through the searing pain. Each second dragged like eternity. His cries echoed across the neighborhood, piercing through the calm that had once blanketed the street. The officer stood above him, breathing hard, his chest puffed up as though he had just conquered a dangerous criminal. He kept one hand near his holster, the other clutching his radio, speaking into it with clipped, rehearsed words. "Dispatch. I've got a suspect resisting. Send backup." The word suspect stung more than the spray itself. A boy with a backpack was now a threat in his eyes. Neighbors shifted uneasily at the edges of the scene. A young woman with her phone held high called out, "He's just a kid. Look at him. He's not resisting anything." The officer shot her a glare. "Step back, ma'am. This is police business." But the crowd didn't disperse. One man muttered under his breath, "Police business, my foot. That's a child." Another woman whispered, "Should we call someone? His parents?" Marcus, his eyes clamped shut, coughed violently. He wanted to scream, to plead, to explain again that he was innocent, but the fire in his throat strangled the words. His mind flickered with flashes of panic, memories of his father's lessons, his warnings about what could happen, and his desperate prayers that maybe this nightmare would end. The officer crouched down, looming over him. "You think this is funny? You think you can mouth off to me and walk away?" His voice was dripping with disdain. "You people never learn. You people." The words sank deep into the marrow of Marcus's bones. Even through the burning pain, the meaning was clear. He wasn't being treated like a child or even a human being. He was being reduced to a stereotype, punished for the color of his skin. The phones kept recording. Some neighbors were frozen, torn between fear of the badge and outrage at the injustice before them. But no one dared step in. The authority of the uniform was like an invisible wall holding them back. Then a voice cut through the crowd. "Marcus?" It was faint at first, filled with disbelief. The boy's heart lurched. That voice, it was his father's. Special Agent David Carter had just pulled into the neighborhood, his black sedan rolling to a slow stop at the corner. He had returned from a long day at FBI headquarters, his mind still weighed down with case files and briefings. But none of that mattered now. As soon as he stepped out of his car and saw the commotion, his world narrowed to a single point. His son lying on the ground, writhing in pain, while a cop towered over him. "Marcus!" David shouted, sprinting toward him. His polished shoes pounded the pavement, his neatly pressed suit jacket flying open. His FBI badge, clipped at his belt, caught the late afternoon sunlight. The officer, startled, turned to face him. "Sir, stay back! This is a police matter!" David didn't slow down. His face twisted with fury and fear all at once. He dropped to his knees beside his son, gently lifting him into his arms. Marcus clung to him, sobbing, gasping for air. "What the hell did you do to my boy?" David's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "He was resisting," the officer said quickly, adjusting his stance, suddenly aware of the cameras pointed at him. "I had to use force. Standard procedure." "Resisting?" David's tone was thunderous. "He's 13 years old. He was walking home with a backpack." His voice cracked with rage, and his eyes burned into the officer's face, searching for even a trace of remorse, but finding none. The neighbors murmured, emboldened now by David's presence. "He's right. The kid didn't do anything," one shouted. Another added, "We saw it all. He just attacked him for no reason." The officer's jaw tightened. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the eyes watching him, the phones capturing every second. But still, his pride refused to bend. David held Marcus closer, whispering softly, "It's okay, son. I've got you. You're safe now." He gently dabbed at Marcus's burning eyes with his handkerchief, though he knew the pain wouldn't subside so easily. Then David stood, his full height casting a shadow over the officer. His presence was commanding, not just as a father, but as a man accustomed to wielding authority at the highest levels of law enforcement. "You made the biggest mistake of your life today," David said, his voice low, steady, and lethal. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The officer blinked, taken aback. "Sir, I don't—" David pulled back his jacket, revealing the gold FBI badge clipped to his belt. The crowd gasped. The officer's face drained of color. "I am Special Agent David Carter, Counterterrorism Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he declared, his voice carrying like a hammer blow. "And that boy you just assaulted is my son." The silence that followed was electric. The officer's hands trembled ever so slightly. The neighbors stared wide-eyed, phones still raised, recording every heartbeat of the unfolding drama. David stepped closer, his voice a growl now. "You think your badge gives you the right to brutalize children? You think you can treat my son like a criminal because of the color of his skin? Not today. Not with me standing here." The officer opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His bravado had crumbled, his authority stripped bare in the face of someone who outranked him in every conceivable way. Marcus, still clinging to his father, whispered weakly, "Dad, it hurts." David's expression softened for a moment as he looked down at his son, but when his eyes snapped back to the officer, they blazed with righteous fury. "You will pay for this! I promise you that!" The crowd erupted with murmurs. Some neighbors nodded, whispering, "Finally, someone's standing up to him." Others exchanged looks of shock and relief, grateful that the boy's father had arrived in time. The officer, pale and sweating, shifted his stance again, suddenly aware of how deeply the situation had turned against him. And in that charged moment, the stage was set for the confrontation that would decide everything, the point where accountability could no longer be avoided. The air around the scene had shifted. The once quiet suburban street now buzzed with tension thick enough to choke on. Neighbors who had once stood at a safe distance pressed closer, emboldened by the arrival of Marcus's father. Phones remained raised, every lens capturing the unfolding drama for the world beyond this neighborhood. David Carter stood tall, his FBI badge gleaming in the sunlight, his body taut with fury and resolve. In his arms, Marcus clung tightly, whimpering as the sting of pepper spray still clawed at his eyes and throat. David's voice rang out, cold and precise, a blade cutting through the heavy silence. "You assaulted my son," he said slowly, his gaze locked on the officer. A child, unarmed, innocent, and you had the audacity to call it procedure. The officer shifted on his feet, sweat rolling down his temple despite the cool breeze. His voice faltered as he attempted to regain authority. "Sir, I was following protocol. He looked suspicious. I asked him questions, and he—" "Suspicious?" David snapped, his voice booming. "Suspicious for what? Walking home with a backpack? Existing while black?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "That's right! He didn't do a damn thing!" David took a step forward, his towering presence suffocating the cop's fragile defense. "You pepper-sprayed a 13-year-old boy because of your prejudice. You humiliated him, traumatized him, and tried to twist it into resisting arrest. Don't insult my intelligence by dressing up your racism as procedure." The officer's lips tightened, his pride battling against the tidal wave of accountability crashing over him. His hand twitched near his radio, but David's eyes flicked to it, sharp as a hawk's. "Don't even think about it," David warned. "You've done enough damage." Marcus coughed weakly, his small voice breaking the tension. "Dad, I couldn't breathe." David bent slightly, his face softening for only a moment as he whispered, "I've got you, son. You're safe now." Then, his attention snapped back to the officer, the fury in his eyes reigniting. "You thought no one would challenge you, didn't you?" David's voice cut deep. "You thought this would be another case of a cop abusing his power and walking away. But you didn't just pick on any child, you picked on mine." He raised his badge higher. "And I'm not just a father, I'm a high-ranking official in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That means every second of this incident is now evidence. Evidence that will end your career." The officer's face blanched. The bravado he had worn like armor melted away, leaving only the raw fear of consequences. For the first time, he stammered, "Sir, Agent Carter, maybe I overreacted. Let's not—" "Overreacted," David thundered. "You assaulted a child. You abused your authority, weaponized your badge, and terrorized a boy who did nothing wrong. That's not an overreaction, it's a crime." The neighbors erupted, their voices rising in unison. "Yes, he's right. Fire him. We've got it all on camera." The cop glanced desperately at the crowd, realizing every face, every phone was now a witness against him. His hands trembled, his entire frame shrinking beneath the weight of his actions. David didn't stop. He stepped closer until the officer was forced to tilt his head up to meet his piercing stare. "Do you understand who you've crossed? I've spent my career taking down terrorists, organized criminals, and threats to national security. I've dealt with men far more dangerous than you, and yet standing here looking at you, I've never been more disgusted." The officer opened his mouth again, but David cut him off with a raised hand. "Save your excuses. They won't protect you this time. The world will see what you did today, and I will make sure that the full weight of the law bears down on you." Marcus whimpered softly in his father's arms, his small body trembling. David lowered his voice for a moment, speaking directly to his son. "I promise you, Marcus, this man will never hurt you again. He will never hurt anyone's child again." Then, turning back to the officer, David's tone became ice cold. "You want to talk about procedure? Here's what procedure looks like." He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and within seconds had a colleague from the Bureau on the line. "This is Special Agent David Carter," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the street. "I need an internal affairs team dispatched immediately to this location. I've got a case of excessive force and civil rights violations by a local officer. Victim is a minor. I also want the U.S. attorney notified. We're treating this as an abuse of power and potential hate crime." The officer's knees visibly wobbled. He looked like a man realizing his career, his reputation, and perhaps even his freedom were evaporating in real time. The crowd murmured louder, some smiling grimly, others still shocked by the rapid turn of events. One neighbor whispered, He's done for. That guy's finished. David ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket with deliberate precision. He straightened his jacket, standing tall once more. "Backup is coming," he told the officer flatly. "But not the kind you wanted. You'll answer for this. Every second of it." The officer stammered again, his voice cracking. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean what?" David snapped. "Didn't mean to brutalize a child? Didn't mean to get caught?" He shook his head, his eyes burning. "Intentions don't erase actions, and actions have consequences." Marcus shifted in his father's arms, his breathing ragged but calmer now. David kissed the top of his son's head, his heart breaking at the sight of his child's swollen, tear-streaked face. "This is what you did," David said, pointing at Marcus. "This is the result of your so-called procedure, a child who will carry this trauma for the rest of his life." The officer had no words left. He stared at the ground, humiliated, his once commanding presence reduced to rubble. And in that moment, the balance of power was undeniable. The man who had wielded his badge as a weapon stood exposed, trembling, undone by his own hatred. The father he had underestimated now loomed over him, not just as a parent, but as a force of justice. The climax had been reached, the scales tipped, and there was no going back. The wail of sirens pierced the air minutes later, shattering the heavy silence that had fallen over the street. Several black SUVs and police cruisers pulled up, doors flying open as federal agents and internal affairs officers spilled out. Their presence carried a different energy, sharp, professional, unshakable. The neighborhood, once a backdrop of quiet lawns and trimmed hedges, had transformed into the scene of a reckoning. Neighbors continued recording, determined to capture every second. For years, whispers of racial profiling and harassment by local police had circulated, but nothing had ever come of them. Now, in broad daylight, the truth stood exposed for all to see. Two internal affairs officers approached David first. "Agent Carter," one said respectfully, recognizing him immediately. "We were briefed. Please tell us what happened." David, still holding Marcus, spoke with a voice that was firm, yet raw with emotion. "This officer stopped my son without cause, accused him of things he didn't do, and pepper-sprayed him while he was completely compliant. He then called it procedure." His eyes burned with restrained rage. "My son is 13 years old. This was not an error. This was targeted abuse." The officers nodded gravely, their faces tightening as they turned toward the local cop. He stood pale, his hands shaking, the swagger he once carried long gone. "You," one of the investigators said coldly. "Badge and weapon. Now." The officer hesitated, his lips trembling as if he might protest. But the icy glares of the investigators left no room for defiance. With fumbling hands, he unclipped his badge, unholstered his gun, and surrendered them. The weight of shame was visible in every movement. Neighbors murmured with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Finally," one whispered. "About time someone held him accountable." As the disgraced officer was led to the side, David crouched down beside Marcus, who was now seated on the back of an ambulance. Paramedics carefully flushed his eyes with a saline solution, easing the burning. Marcus winced, but for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a flicker of safety. David stroked his son's hair gently. "You were so brave, Marcus," he whispered. "I'm proud of you. None of this was your fault." Marcus's lip quivered. "Dad, I didn't even do anything. Why did he hate me so much?" The question cut deeper than any blade could. David swallowed hard, blinking back the sting of tears. He placed his hands on Marcus's shoulders, steadying his voice. "Because some people let ignorance and fear control them. They don't see you for who you are. They only see the color of your skin. But listen to me, son. You are not what they think you are. You are better, stronger, and you are loved." Marcus nodded slowly, tears spilling down his cheeks, though comforted by his father's unwavering presence. As the paramedics finished their treatment, one of the internal affairs officers approached David again. "Agent Carter, we'll be filing charges of excessive force, child endangerment, and abuse of authority. There may also be grounds for federal civil rights violations. Rest assured, this will not be swept under the rug." David nodded solemnly. "Good. Because if I've learned anything in my career, it's that accountability is the only way to stop this cycle." He glanced at the crowd, at the phones still recording. And maybe now, people will believe what we've been saying all along. The officer was escorted to a waiting car, his head bowed, his career in ruins. The crowd buzzed, some cheering quietly, others shaking their heads at the weight of what they had witnessed. Justice, at least in this small corner of the world, had found its footing. David turned back to Marcus, who leaned into his father's embrace, exhausted but safe. The boy's innocence had been scarred, but not destroyed. In that moment, father and son clung to each other, united not only by blood but by resilience. As the sun dipped lower, casting the street in golden light, David addressed the small crowd that had gathered. His voice was steady, carrying both pain and resolve. "What happened today should never happen to any child. My son had me to protect him, but not every black boy does. Not every family has the privilege of someone in a position of authority to demand justice. That's why this fight can't stop here. Racism isn't just an individual problem, it's a system, and it must be dismantled." The crowd nodded, some wiping away tears, others clutching their phones tighter, determined to share the truth. David looked down at Marcus, his heart heavy yet hopeful. "We'll heal from this, son, but we'll also fight. For you, and for every child who deserves to walk home without fear." Marcus leaned his head against his father's chest, his voice small but certain. "I don't want this to happen to anyone else." David kissed his forehead. "And that's exactly why it won't. Not if we keep pushing, keep speaking out, and keep demanding change." As the FBI SUVs pulled away, taking the disgraced officer into custody, the neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet state. But for everyone who had witnessed the ordeal, nothing would ever look the same again. For Marcus, the memory of burning eyes and trembling fear would linger. But so would the memory of his father standing tall, unyielding and fierce in his defense. For David, the sight of his son in pain would never leave him. But neither would his renewed determination to confront the very system he had devoted his life to. And for the officer who thought his badge gave him untouchable power, the lesson was seared in the ruin of his career. Prejudice has no shield when justice finally rises. The story ended not with silence, but with a promise, an unspoken vow carried in the hearts of everyone present. A vow that this moment, this injustice, would not be forgotten. Because change begins not in the halls of power, but on streets like this one, when ordinary people decide enough is enough.